All right, good morning. My name is Michael Dickerson. I'm the system administrator for the University of Richmond School of Law. And bear with me this morning. This is my first presentation ever. So I have a number of things going on in my head, how to do it the best, whether I read the script, whether I do this. So if it's a jumbled mess, be gentle. But I think you'll like what I have for you today. So I'm going to tell you about a story, how I built a production web app called SpiderSeats from Vibe Coding. It's not a story about software, it's a story about a real problem, designing for real users. By the end of this talk, I hope you'll have a practical insight of how AI can accelerate development in your workflow as well. Before I move forward, this is not about building something and interjecting AI into it with AI capabilities. This is using AI as a development partner. So the first thing is that we have users in our space that help professors with assigned seats. Assigned seats are not a thing in college. In University of Richmond School of Law, they are. Not from the professor's point of view, but from the student's point of view. They feel safe, they feel secure, they feel seen. We had a production level software 2 years ago that was sunset due to code degradation to a server migration that we had. It was built of CSS, HTML, PHP, and SQL. I inherited it. I was able to maintain it for a few years, and then when we went to a new server, it couldn't come along. So staff didn't have a resource there. So what they did was they used a mix of spreadsheets, Word documents, and even in some cases, construction paper and glue sticks. And that's serious. It's not a joke. I've seen it. And so they were passing around everything to each other. There was no centralized place for the students' data, for archiving of seats. It was a real problem. It was an inconvenience. And so this wasn't something that I needed to make something cool. It was a real world problem. So the next decision I had to make was build versus buy. And my first instinct wasn't to build something from scratch, it was to find an existing solution. So I evaluated small scale tools and I evaluated commercial products as well, but none met our needs. My boss is in the room here today. Some of the small scale tools she had a concern of that Michael in Iowa was running a seating chart software. And if Michael in Iowa didn't want to support that anymore, what happened to our infrastructure? Others were above the $10,000 threshold for a request for proposal. So that brings in other caveats there. So it was the best decision to build this from scratch. And with vibe coding, it allowed me to bridge that gap from idea to implementation with a skill set that was a little bit more robust than mine. So some of the visions and the requirements that we needed, I had one guiding principle was simplicity for users requires complex thinking from me. If the interface feels simple, it's because it is, and the complexity has already been thought about beforehand. We had clear requirements. We needed to be web-based and centralized. One reliable system needed to be in place instead of scattered spreadsheets. And I wanted to implement a drag and drop functionality, which in the old tool we had, but it was it's great on the back end, but my predecessor will tell you first thing, he is not a front end developer at all. So there was a problem there. It also needed a full, robust student directory that contains student names, photos, and graduation years. Because what we found is that seating charts aren't about just names; they're about faces. The professor allows or learns the students' names, their personality. If they're not there for a couple of days, they may look into doing a wellness check on them to see if they're okay, seeing how the first semester of law school is treating them, you know. Sometimes that can be tough. Finally, it had to be maintained by a single developer. The specific constraint contained every architectural decision through the entire project. And that the main challenge I had was to hide this complexity of the program behind a nice user interface that feels obvious when you look at it. So what is vibe coding? Andre Karpathy, an AI researcher and co-founder of OpenAI, coined the term vibe coding in February of 25. He described it as a method of software development where developers use LLMs to generate code based on intuition and high-level prompts, rather than manually writing and reviewing every line. I like this approach. I wanted to try it. It became a summer project, if you will, that I got the green light to go ahead to do. We don't have a whole lot on our plate in the summer at law school. Our students work, so we don't have classes. And in addition to allowing me to do that, my department head, our dean of the library, also said, hey, if this thing works out, maybe you want to build it into a presentation. So here we are, almost a year later, just shy of a year, about 10 months. And vibe coding, you describe your behavior, your goals, and your system characteristics. And AI translate that into intent in the working code. AI becomes the collaborator and not the driver. It was my co-pilot, my teammate, and it didn't replace me. It amplified and accelerated the development as a whole. I acted as the project manager, and I allowed AI to be the code engineer, period. I know how to direct things, kind of quarterback the situation, if you will. And it worked out well. It was really fun. So the next decision I needed to do was what tech stack I was going to use. And so I started researching this. Once I had the idea, I had to figure out how to build it, right? And so I started to hear about a fork of VS Code called Cursor that was kind of getting some attraction, and also Windsurf. I decided on Cursor. Also picked Next.js and TypeScript for front-end framework, safety and maintainability. Tailwind CSS for consistent fast UI. Supabase for Postgres database, authentication, storage, APIs, and admin tools. And Vercel to deploy that on the front end. And this stack gave me two major advantages. One, it was a modern foundation where common problems have already been established and have patterns and toolings to remedy them. So I wasn't reinventing the solution to solve problems. Second, I created a workflow where AI could meaningfully accelerate implementation, especially during repetitive tasks, such as wireframes and those inevitable blank page moments of where do I go from here. The real success of this project didn't come from AI alone. It came with pairing AI speed along with my intentional and focused design thinking for the users. And I'd like to point out that during this time, I had this idea. We happened to have a meeting at the law school. I said, hey, what do you think about this? They said, go right ahead. And I'm from Richmond, and we have a group called AI Ready RVA. If you haven't heard of them, they're driving AI literacy in the region. And so they actually had a seminar on vibe coding, and I attended it. And Kyle Johnson, former metadata scientist and Columbia University grad, was the speaker. And he got up there and started talking about vibe coding. And within 10 minutes, he solidified this tech stack. And he said, if you are thinking about this, this is how I would do it. And so when I knew that and I saw that, it gave me the motivation to really go do something with it. And one thing I'd like to point out is in addition to this tech stack, I had to learn GitHub on top of this. I've had a GitHub repo for 10 years that I put a graduate project in a long, long time ago. And that was all it was there. But I actually learned how to do pull requests and edit it in real time the right way. And I'd like to point out that was only after I lost everything twice, right? And so it was one of those things where it takes 24 to 40 hours to get back to where you try to implement a drop shadow in a button, right? And something went wonky, and it probably was my fault, but I'll never say that again. So next up was the database debate, was the infrastructure, and security and control mattered. So SpiderSeats handles a variety of data. Student data, which is names, photos, and graduation year. It's not a whole lot. It's not anything. It's not the nuclear codes. We have user data, which is names and email addresses only. And then classroom data, chart history, room info, and then templates to build that. One of the great parts about this was Supabase had all those tools. It was a batteries included situation. The next big decision I had to make was whether I ran Supabase in the cloud or do I self-host it, right? Out of the box in the cloud sounds great, but then that also opens me up to potential situations where I'm exposing student data, even though it's just pictures, names, and graduation years. So I decided to a self-hosting instance with Docker, and what also makes that whole stack portable. And I also didn't know how to do that either, right? I had to figure that out. But it actually really worked for this because it gave me complete control, basically a robust on and off switch for the entire stack, the entire project. We have hours of operation for this project. It's on from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., 2 weeks of every semester at the beginning of the semester. And it doesn't need to be any more than that. We don't have seating charts being built all throughout. There is a plan coming that if we want to keep it online all the time, but that's the next version. So everything was pretty smooth with the Supabase CLI and installing it via the terminal and within Cursor. Once you find those demand or commands, it allows you to install pretty easily. The next question was how the front end would connect to the back end, and that's where Vercel came in. Vercel allowed me to connect those through a tunneling aspect. So what I did with this was I decided to implement Cloudflare Tunnel, and that allowed me to create a secure, stable connection without exposing any internal systems. And Vercel worked great with this. The way I'll show it later, but the way that I do it for local development versus online allows me that full control of the stack itself. Like I mentioned before, Docker makes a stack portable. Tunnels are more production ready than they feel, and the infrastructure handles the data with patience and gives me clear ownership. And the core product is what I call the room designer. This is the heart of SpiderSeats, and it's an interactive canvas that represents each classroom where you can create room layouts and assign students to seats. It sounds simple. Drag a student and drop it on the seat, but making it feel right was the real work and making it feel smooth and intuitive. So this is the landing page. These are all the active rooms that we have. Everything that you see, I decided drop shadows, size, colors, all of it. And I just told it in real terms how to build it. What I wanted, and AI built it for me. I've got a couple more examples of rooms here. This is one of our biggest rooms, 102. As you can see, I think this had the numbering scheme changed in this room. It used to just go 1 through 100, but they actually implemented rows when we had a renovation a couple years ago. One of the problems that I solved here was, or had to solve, was how do I represent physical spaces digitally? How do you make drag and drop feel natural? And then how do you provide immediate visual feedback? To help facilitate this, I implemented an 800 by 600 canvas, which is this one here. And then inside it, changes based on what the room layout was. 20 pixel grid positioning system. It has real-time updates. Visual feedback that I decided upon was that yellow seats are empty. When you drag a student over to it, it turns green. Here's one of our other newer classrooms with a different layout. And then once again, one more. So the interaction design details this is where drag and drop came in. If you drag a student from the student directory and drop it onto a seat, it instantly assigns. If you drop them somewhere else, they snap back to the student directory. So I built in a fail-safe soft behavior there. And I think that the forgiveness matters because oftentimes this is being done in a bit of a hurry. Professor Dickerson will come in and hand a sheet that they've passed out in the class, and everybody has signed it where they're sitting. And they come back and they need it, for maybe the turnaround. And oftentimes they don't give it to them a day or two in advance, right? So I didn't want the user to be frustrated or anything to break, right, or misclick. Each drag and drop updates the layout data. React re-renders immediately. TypeScript helps the data shapes stay safe, and the overall experience feels instantaneous. So the next part was making it human with the student directory. So like I mentioned before, it wasn't just names and seats, it's faces. And accuracy matters, and especially in our professional environment, depending on your first name or the name you'd like to be called by or a preferred name. So we want to make sure we represent the student as though they want to be seen. And it's very important there. So I integrated hundreds of photos throughout the experience, but this also introduced performance concerns. So we have 423 students total in this stack already. We have a photo for each. So, and then in the directory, the thumbnails are showing as well. The UX allowed me to handle smart sizing, lazy loading, and upload certain workflow that didn't feel like IT software. It just felt like something that you were interacting with on the back end. So in order to build the rooms, I kind of had a little trick up my sleeve. Our predecessor was a law librarian that taught legal research, but he happened to be a tinkerer when it came to programming, just enough to be dangerous. And when he left, he had 8 projects that were on the books, and he left me one page front and back with the logins, the names, and a brief description of what it was. And some of those got sunset, but some didn't. And like I said, I had the seating chart tool for a while, and we had multiple blank layouts. So what I did was I turned those PDFs into JPEGs, and then in the cursor screen, I uploaded that picture and said, hey, we're going to build a new chart for this tool, and it had a baseline to go off of. Now, it wasn't perfect, but in most of the times it got me close enough to where then I only had to tweak a few seeks with a few pixels. And you would say, go down 10 pixels, over 10 pixels. It was like real life AI Tetris, right? But it gave me such a leg up to where I didn't have to hard code these because the backside of the old tool was all done with CSS. If you've ever tried to lay out a seating chart with CSS, it's a really, really big math problem. And then you get texts at 11:30 at night, when you first start this job saying, what is happening here? And my boss can contest to that. And so the output for this was saving and printing. So I had to determine what the best way to do that was. And so for saving charts, I standardized the data for the professor's last name, a class name, a semester, a year, and a section. And those fields combine into one consistent descriptive file name that gets placed in their portal, as well as if you want to save it out. However, for printing, I ran into a bit of a problem. I wanted to do a PDF export, and that was the second instance where I broke my entire site. So we just copied the save button and turned the text into print, and then we instructed the users to print a PDF, something that was already built. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel there. And that was a 48-hour lesson again. And after that, I got serious about GitHub. And the ultimate goal in which I achieved was that the exported chart, whether it's a file or a print, looked professional the moment it came out and whenever you opened it. Okay. Do I know anything about anxiety? I think I've calmed down a little bit more as I've sit up here, and the Jordans and the Blazers don't hurt much either. But so I didn't want to surprise anybody, so I had a meeting with the core users. I had tested everything. Everything was working on my stack. It was working on the web. But we all know that moment where it works on my machine and then it works in the hands of the users, right? So I had a pre-launch meeting with the users. I explained the tool. I demoed it live and tried to prepare them so the launch wasn't a surprise. And honestly, their reaction was one of the best moments of the project. People were shocked in a good way and deeply appreciative because their needs have been unmet for almost 2 years. And I made it clear that this tool was built for them and them only. When I say them, I'm talking about 3 people, maybe 5, right? The demo and the was tested by 13 people, but at any given time, no more than 3 to 5 are ever going to use this tool. So we don't have a really big user base here, but it was just enough. And I think that approach to detail allowed them to understand that they've been seen and they weren't forgotten. And that was very important to me. So after I launched this, it was in a 2-week demo period. And then I requested feedback. So I did a structured Qualtrics survey focused on usability, feature value, performance, and overall satisfaction. I got total responses from 5 people out of 13, which was enough to determine and see strong patterns. Overall, the users liked that getting started was easy. There was intuitive drag and drop functionality. The print output looked professional, and it saved time versus their spreadsheets and other manual processes, aka glue sticks and construction paper. However, what they wanted to improve was faster page loading overall and site optimization, which was part of the V2 that I'll talk about later. The most important tool or feedback of this tool was that it doesn't work. Like they weren't saying it just doesn't work. It's not good. They said this works and we will use it. Now let's make it even smoother. So they allowed me to settle a little bit more, and that distinction was all the difference. So once I had those results, I started to build out the vision for version 2, and it wasn't a whole lot. We're talking about a nip here and a tuck there, right? It wasn't a full rewrite. Didn't need to be. It was about refinement, and I specifically focused on performance improvements because performance is a feature, infrastructure improvements, and then overall UI UX refinements by real usage, some of the stuff that they had shared. So the big lesson here was the best roadmap isn't about my assumptions. It's observed behavior and user feedback. And this is when SpiderSeats shifted from a tool I built to a tool we were shaping together. And they felt a part of the process and bought into it. So what vibe coding enabled for me was accelerated the boring parts, scaffolding, boilerplate, wiring, different repetitive component patterns. It improved my ability to explore. I could try different approaches quickly and pick what felt right, especially for the UI UX. And in the past, when I've designed things for other companies or internal SharePoint sites or stuff like that, I always find that anything more visual and a breadcrumb style approach to where it allows the user to find their answers and you guide them, you get a better visceral reaction from the user instead of just giving them the answer. So that's the approach I took here. And also, it didn't remove the responsibility on my part. I had to choose the architecture, understand what was under the hood, test things, and then maintain that coherent design. Vibe coding increased the need for good judgment. It's easier to generate a lot of code quickly, but that can become a mess even quicker. Ultimately, in the end, I needed to understand what was being shipped to the user. So anything that I could give for advice, if you wanted to apply this approach for AI-assisted development, start with workflows, not the features. Write down what end-to-end goals a user is trying to accomplish. Use AI to draft, not decide. Ask it for options, trade-offs, but ultimately you choose what direction to go in. Output was a first-class requirement, printing and exporting, naming, archiving. This is where the tool will succeed and or fail ultimately. And also design for forgiveness with the drag and drop method I mentioned earlier. If you happen to put it in an open space, it doesn't break anything. It just goes back to the student directory. And treat performance like UI, UX. If it's slow, it feels broken to the users, period. So the takeaways here is that SpiderSeats started as a response to a painful manual process, which included spreadsheets, construction paper, but it ultimately became a production tool that staff could rely on through collaboration. And the difference that I noticed that wasn't syntax, it was the critical thinking, design, judgment, empathy, and understanding the user's needs. And the UI UX focus didn't just make it pretty, which I love to make things pretty. It made it usable, learnable, and sustainable. And ultimately, vibe coding didn't replace development, it amplified it. I don't have some of this data here. I added it last night, but I thought it was important to point out that I went back at the end and said, how many tokens did I use to build this? And it was 320 million tokens. And if you know anything about AI, that's what it uses to calculate your job. So I waited to the end to put this on here because had I built it the way Cursor offers different tiers, this is what it would have cost. If I would have done an API build, it would have been about $2,500. On the free tier, it would have been about $700. The Pro plan, about $600. However, if you download Cursor and you set up an account and you add your .edu email address, you get access to their Pro level for free for a year. You also get access to Copilot for 2 years with a .edu account. So I had that as well in my back pocket. It was 2 different environments, the same approach. So my setup cost free $99, right? And the dev time for V1 was about 75 days. The first date that I opened the GitHub repo was in May. That was it. And then it sat dormant until late June after I went to that seminar with Kyle Johnson. And then I really amplified the development after that. And so roughly 75 days. And then we launched at V1 in the fall for 2 weeks. And then once I gathered that data and feedback and built out V2 was another 15 days. So roughly 75 is my best calculation there. So thank you for having me. I've had a blast creating this project and this presentation. I hope I didn't come across too nervous. I tried to lean into it, right? At this time, after a brief demo, I'll open it up to questions, and I invite you to ask me anything about the project or the approach to vibe coding it. All right, so against my better judgment, I'm going to do a live demo for you. What could go wrong, right? However, I'd like to point out that nothing can go wrong because this is a localized setup. I'm not relying on the internet here. So nothing is going to break, if you will, there. Easy, Giva. Easy. All right. So, first thing, perfect, is go ahead and open up Cursor. And if you've not seen Cursor before, it's a full IDE. It allows you to have a file directory, a file editor here in the middle, and then an AI agent bolted on the side. Underneath this AI agent, you can select auto. It's what I had selected, but if you undo it, then it gives you all the actual language models that you can specify. I'm having a certain issue for V3 that I'm going to specify a model going forward to make sure that I'll unleash everything I have capable at it. But up until this point, I use the auto model. So I open up a terminal here, and I've got my cheat sheet. So I said that this thing runs on users time frame, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So I open it up about 8:30 a.m. Ignore the set list on the right for Motorhead from 1980. That's going to be on my radio show this weekend that I host. However, it made the screen look nice and uniform and made my OCD calm down even more. So I have a small little setup process here. So we bring this up and we open up Docker with a command from the terminal. So I allow this to settle in. And I don't know if it does anything, but I like to have the charts open on the side. It just makes it feel like dashboardy, right? So once that settles down, there we go. The next step is to start Supabase, which is my local instance. Same terminal. And just like that, Supabase is running now. Here, I'd like to point out that if I were going to be opening this up for production, I would run the Cloudflare command, and that gives me a URL. Then I go and add it to Vercel that connects the front end and the back end. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to run it locally. But without that, that's the caveat to open it up to users. All right, and there we are. Everything is up and running. And here we are. Here's SpiderSeats. So everything that you see here was brought out of my head, how to interact with it. I went with a less is more approach. The sign up modal here, so you enter your credentials, you hit sign up, and Supabase sends you an authentication email. If you need to sign in, put a quick link there. You just enter your credentials as well. And also forgot your password. I had to build in all these modals. Always made sure that I have an anchor link or an anchor button back to the front page. And I'd like to point out that every single one of these pages are locked down. You cannot get to them. And this user access button here, if you hover over it in a minute, you'll see it says Michael and my level of permission. And then one I mentioned about the anchor button is on every page, also when you sign in. So what you're going to see here is the admin dashboard. I have full control over everything. The only difference between the admin dashboard and the user dashboard is they do not have access to students or users. They only have access to rooms and charts. And here you go. So this is the dashboard I decided upon. Every navigational element has two ways to get there. Everything on the top has a bigger button on the bottom. It's just two different doors into the same house. Everything down to the drop shadows and the rollovers I explained to AI, and AI built it for me. The first thing is a student directory. This is real data. You can see it here. I built in filters as well, so you could do class of 2026, 27. You also can clear that. You can also search for people as well, and they bubble up to the top. Arjun is one of our student workers, so he won't mind that I use him as an example. If you want to edit a student, you add their first, last name, or whatever. Pick their graduation year, or if they're exchange or transfer student, and then you add that photo, and it'll save it back to there. If you want to delete someone, the delete button doesn't exist until you select someone. Then it comes alive. You can select more people, and then that number will change. If you want to add a student, the same modal's there, right? I need the same modal for create or edit. Also, we have that anchor button again. And these are all active students. Total of 423 across our 3 classes. So the next page is user management. This just lists the users, their names, emails, and their roles. Version 2, I implemented the last login because what I didn't want to do was tell me that you had strong opinions about my tool, and I couldn't confirm whether you logged into it or not. Because if you don't have a login on there, then we have another discussion, right? So that was pretty good, and it worked great. Going back, and then here's the room configuration, like I showed earlier. And we've got multiple different layouts. I'm just going to pick a small layout here to show you. Let's see, 71. Fine. Back to 172. We give it a little bit more better visualization. So if we start looking up a student, here's Arjun. We drag him over, and he's on that seat. And I'm just going to do people with A names. And as you can see, it's intuitive, it's easy, sort of like you already know what to do. You hit save here. I'll put Dickerson. ACCS, spring. And since I'm a Michael Jordan fan, we'll do section 23. And then we'll save chart. And there we go, it's saved. So, also at this point, you can hit print if you want. And I had already tested this last night. And one of the good parts about this is if you select a current page and make sure you doesn't have any carryover. There seems to be some ghost characters on other pages when you do this. Current gets you what you need. And also, if you do fit page width, look how small that is, right? It's not the greatest. So you can actually handle that by bumping it up manually with the scale. So I instruct everybody to do that. And as you can see, the student's name and face are fully present. Later on, I'll show you. This is just in this room modal here, but and PDF as well. Save to PDF, just like I mentioned before. So sort of the same button. So I'm going to go back at this point. I'm not going to edit any more here. And then I'm going to go back to the home page, which you don't have to, but I'm just showing you how everything locks together. And then we'll go to the charts. So from my view, I can see the charts that I built at the top, and then I can see all the seating charts other people built at the bottom. So as you can see up here, this one says Dickerson, ACCS, Spring 26, Section Jordan. And then it has never been updated and was created by. It shows the room name, how many students have been assigned, and also all these live tiles at the top change. It'll change. It was 18, now it's 19 active charts. A total assigned seats. So that's an ongoing number across the entire site. So for that first one, say we forgot to put my boss Kim there, right? She's not in here as a student, but I'm just giving you an example. I can go in and add Liam, do him at the bottom right here, hit save. Same information comes up here, just hit save again, and it overwrites that existing file. Right? We go back, and as you can see, now it has an updated date. It keeps track of exactly when it was created versus updated. And if we go here to view, we can now see clearly that Liam's in this. And if we hit print, we can also see that he's now in this. And then up here at the top, you hover over Michael and it says access admin. And then if we were to sign back out, everything's now locked back down. And that's it. Thank you so much.